It's actually really comforting to see all of your smiles. And this may sound a little weird, but that's because we're social animals. Like, if we were non-social animals, like if we were all tigers, yeah, that wouldn't be comforting to see a bunch of tigers in this room, right? We'd all be looking at each other out of the sides of our eyes. But we're not. We're social animals. And I didn't appreciate the importance of that until fairly recently. So I want to tell you a little bit about my story. And I want to start here, 6 years ago, when I was watching tankers sail through the rainforest. I was at the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute on an island in the Panama Canal, and I was there studying ants. And my colleagues and I were doing research on how ants influence the ecology of tropical rainforests and how that association is being affected by climate change. And I didn't become interested in ants until after I graduated from college. And I was working in a restaurant in a college town with a bunch of folks who I think would have described themselves as overeducated revolutionaries. And you can just imagine our shifts in the kitchen. It was totally a blast. We would have these discussions about all sorts of different ideas. Well, one day, one of my coworkers said to me, "Hey, have you ever read the book Sociobiology by the evolutionary biologist E.O. Wilson?" And I hadn't, but I picked it up and I became totally engrossed in it. The book describes the evolution of social systems and everything from slime molds to humans. And there's one section of the book on ants, which is Wilson's main area of study. And in that section, he describes how ants individually only have simple behavioral repertoires, but ants as colonies have been able to respond collectively to complex environmental problems for millions of years. And I was just blown away by the idea that evolution by natural selection could shape rules of behavior that would allow social groups to thrive in complex situations. And so after spending this time in this restaurant with a bunch of academic burnouts, what did I decide to do? Go to grad school, of course. And so I did. And then after getting a PhD and a faculty position and finally tenure, based on research and teaching that I did around ant social behavior, I found myself in Panama watching tankers sail through the rainforest. And I had a great life. I was doing projects, making presentations at conferences, publishing papers, teaching classes, pretty much a typical job description for a university faculty member in the sciences. And it was great, adventurous, intellectually stimulating. I could have done it forever. But right around that time, something snapped within me. And I think it was because I started teaching this class called The Biology of Sustainability. And I'd spend my time over the course of a semester talking to students about all the global environmental problems: climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, challenges associated with urbanization. And honestly, I felt like over the course of the semester, I started to lose some of the students because they were young people and they were thinking excitedly about their lives, their families, their careers, all the things that they wanted to do in the world. And here I am talking about these predictions that are just so gloomy, just so dire. And I'm like, man, I have got to change the story. I have to have the focus a little bit less on these predictions and more on what can be done. And more than that, it'd be great if I could figure out a structure that would allow the students to get involved and be able to create their own solutions-oriented narratives. So I turned here to a community-style garden that some students and I started on our campus. And gardens like this are pretty common on university campuses these days, but they're tough to pull off because they often require long-term financial support. And I thought that at the time, if we put this out there to the administrators and said, this is going to be a great project, the benefits are going to be great for the community, they're going to say that's not enough. There's a lot of potential community projects out there. Why should we invest in this one? But I thought if we could incorporate research and teaching into this project, then maybe that has a chance to be successful. And that seemed easy enough because I thought, why can't we use these gardens to ask the questions that ecologists like me ask when we're doing research in grasslands or lakes or forests? How does the availability of resources affect competition among plants? How does biodiversity affect the productivity of the whole system? Well, it worked. And pretty soon we had students doing research projects, collecting data, putting presentations together, and then going to conferences, publishing papers, and enhancing their resumes. It was great. But other good things started happening too, because students started making an impact on their community. And one way they did this was just by being present in the space, because community members would come by and talk to the students about their projects, about urban agriculture, and about global environmental problems. And the narrative changed. Community members started to think about students not just as drunk troublemakers on the weekends, but actually as hardworking and totally committed environmentalists. And then another way it started impacting the community is students were able to make donations to food shelves with the produce. And this was great because the project was already yielding research publications and presentations, the currency of academia. And the vegetables that were being produced were just a welcome byproduct that could be used for community good. Okay, so that's cool. You know, a project that integrates research teaching and community engagement. One project at one campus in Minnesota. But let me tell you why I think this concept has transformative potential for local food system. And it starts because urban agriculture and a vibrant local food system has the potential to provide a lot of community benefits. It can promote civic engagement. It can enhance aesthetics of landscapes. It can create economic opportunities. And it can get people to eat healthier. And people have suggested that all of these community benefits can be realized preferentially by people living in lower income parts of cities where there's often vacant lots and high unemployment rates. But the thing is that our economic system isn't designed to promote urban agriculture and all of its community benefits. Growing food in small spaces is expensive and difficult. You can't use heavy equipment, and you can't take advantage of economies of scale like rural farmers can. So how people responded to this? Well, one way is to rely on grants. But the problem with that is that it's not scalable, and it's often not sustainable. Another way that people have tried to respond to this is by trying to make operations profitable by focusing on growing fancy greens and heirloom varieties of tomatoes and other crops, and then selling them at high prices to rich consumers. But one of the main hopes for urban agriculture is to create a more just food system for everyone. So having a system that's catering to the well-heeled just doesn't cut it. But maybe there's a third way. Maybe, what if we could get university partnerships to help incubate a just local food system? What if we could get food growing operations and distribution operations that actually were also simultaneously research spaces and training grounds for students? What if we could get students and faculty from local universities working on the science of crop production in small spaces? What if we could get engineering students working on building tools, especially for urban farmers? What if we could get social science students learning how to measure the impact of projects by focusing on local food projects in communities? But the emphasis wouldn't just be about theorizing and assessing. It would actually be on doing, because we could have the university partnerships with community members creating and developing programs that the communities are excited about. So let me give you an example of one of these partnership ideas by telling you about a food distribution program called Brightside Produce. So a few years ago, I had the opportunity to meet a couple of 16-year-olds from an underserved part of Minneapolis. Their names were Adam and Dee Dee. And Adam and Dee Dee were really focused on trying to make the community healthier. And they were focused on the convenience stores in the community that make up the vast majority of the retail food infrastructure, like it is in many urban neighborhoods. And they realized that those convenience stores weren't stocking fresh fruits and vegetables. And the reason for that is that these convenience stores didn't have access to a produce distribution service, because traditional distributors require $150 minimum orders. And those small convenience stores don't have the capacity for selling that much produce. So together with a university student, Carly, we set out to try to figure out a system that could work for those local store owners. And so this is how it works. So the team, university students and youth, get together and they buy big orders of conventional produce, bananas, apples, oranges, lots of other items. And then they use a university vehicle, and this is important, that's set aside for supporting faculty research and teaching. And then they take that order to stores and they allow store owners to buy whatever they want. Maybe they'll get a whole case of something. Maybe they'll just get a dozen apples and oranges, whatever the store needs. And the team works together on every aspect of the project, but the university student plays a supporting role, and the youth takes lead, and he's this community liaison, and he's also learning how to do customer service and sales experience. Then, to make the program financially sustainable, the team takes the leftovers, and they bundle them up and sell them to faculty, staff, and students and neighbors at the university, like a CSA program. The money that comes from that, plus the sales to the stores, is enough to cover the cost of the whole operation and to pay a $15 an hour wage to the youth who goes on the delivery run. And then the data and the stories from the system are incorporated into classes and used to support research at the university. So this is an example of university students working with local youth to realize some of those community benefits from a just local food system. The stores are able to stock fresh, affordable produce, making healthy choices easier for community residents. And then the local youth are able to get employment opportunities and start to develop a larger social network that can open up new opportunities in the future. But this is totally mutually beneficial because the students and the faculty get a ton out of this too. Like the relationships that have emerged from this, the experiences, they've enriched every aspect of our lives. So when I first came to the Ashoka Exchange a few years ago, I was blown away by how universities had been able to take their human capital and their assets and use those in collaboration to help develop transformative community partnerships. And then since that time, I've learned a lot about these university community partnerships that have been focused on local growing operations. But the thing is, I think collectively, we're just scratching the surface when it comes to enhancing the local food system. And one of the reasons is because there are a lot of people out there that are just like I was a few years ago. Curious, intellectually driven, eager to work with students to make the world a better place, but just totally burnt out and disillusioned with the idea of chasing grants and publications that often yield only marginal and fleeting returns. So I became fascinated by ants because I love the way how ants individually, with all their limitations, could come together and work in common purpose. And now I'm just grateful that I can spend the rest of my career doing the same thing with my students and my community. Thank you.